All right, now I am also a firm believer that you don't take a test blindly. You don't take a test with the mindset of how many can I get wrong. That I think shows you that you don't have a system or a structure, right? That you're not really in control of the test. So I think knowing the test structure is key here, because then you can build your own plan, your own strategy for how you're going to get yourself up over 70%. So you need 70% or greater to pass. The test has 120 questions. You have 2 hours to take the test. One thing that I'll mention before we get into the numbers, if you look at the bottom here where it says about the pre-test question. So at all times, all of the NCCA accredited certification tests are doing this, where they have 100 questions that you are getting scored on. And then there are these 20 pre-test questions. So these are ones that they are piloting for the next exam, where they want to evaluate how people are answering them. So if you ever get to material that you're like, whoa, we never covered this, I never saw this before, I didn't really understand this when I took the test. I think that got in my head the most, because I was like, is there stuff that I missed? How many questions like this are going to be coming up? It's not that at all. So if you see that, let that kind of be like a sign that that test is probably not going to be scored. Do your best on every question, because you don't know for certain what is and what isn't. But whether you get that right or wrong, you're not scored on those. So you're only going to be scored on 100 questions. They scale the tests now. When I took it, it was very simple. It was like, this is the number of questions you get from this section, this section, this section. Now they do it as these percentages. So we have to look at it the way that they do it. But I think it's still easier for us, as long as we know that there's a little bit of variation, give or take, one or two questions here or there. If we still think of it as the number of questions, because then you can visualize how you are going to build your test score. All right, so today, and our second Start Here lecture, we're just covering these miscellaneous topics that we need to separate out from everything else for study purposes. After that, we're going to be going through section by section. So here's a brief overview. Section 1, super easy. This is things like personal training as a profession. So that's where we'll get questions about what are the requirements for continuing education units? What is ethical business practice? Really easy. Section 2, also pretty easy. And really important for us. So this is psychology and behavior change, how to set goals, how to evaluate where someone is at, knowing what's the best way to motivate them to move forward. Section 3 is basic science. This is like a black hole. I see people get sucked into this all the time, and you don't need to. So what I want you to look at now, come back up to sections 1 and 2. Section 1, 2 chapters, super easy material. Section 2, 2 chapters, still pretty easy material. Section 3, 6 chapters, okay? And it's going to be all of the systems in the body, right? You're learning everything about the heart, the lungs, the nervous system, the muscles, all of that is there. But that is not going to be central in our plan, because for most people, if your background is not already in science, you could study that stuff for a year, and it might still take time to master that. So what we need to do is use that very strategically, figuring out how to fit these pieces together into our strategy. But what I want to emphasize right now is, if you're following what I present as the general strategy, you can breathe, because we don't need that stuff. We're going to try to pick up as many points as we can, but you're going to be leaning into the other sections where it's a lot easier for you to control the outcome. So we'll come back there. Section 4 is 2 chapters, but they're the big ones. This is going to be the assessments. So I'm sure probably one of the reasons you're here, that the term overactive, underactive muscles, that's where this comes from. So that's going to be a big part of the course. Now, section 5 and 6, these are the ones, if you look at those percentages, or if you're thinking about it roughly in that number of questions, this is the bulk of the test. So section 5 is going to be all of the different exercise chapters, right? We have like flexibility, balance, core, cardio, etc. Section 6 is program design and exercise and special populations. As long as you put the time in for those, the questions become so easy. You just need to know what to predict, how to understand what they're asking. But I think they're on par with sections 1 and 2 for the level of difficulty, as long as you're prepared. So that's part of the reason why we're starting with the resistance chapter today, because that takes some time, but that's all right, because since we're starting there, you're going to have that time. All right, so let's go through this. Let's say that you for some reason you think you're an exception here, like say that you have a background in science. Fantastic. You're still probably not going to have to put a ton of time into that because you've already done it. Okay, so every person wants to hear what I present as the strategy. Write it down right now, write down your numbers and think about what is realistic for you and how could we build this. So sections 1 and 2, you're always going to hear me say sections 1 and 2 together, because together they're going to make 25% of the test. I see, because the information is easy, people don't spend enough time there, and then they end up losing these points that are just like, it's too, you don't want to lose those points. There's no reason to. So we want to make sure that we absolutely master sections 1 and 2. There's no reason that we can't get 23, 24, maybe even 25 points out of 25 there. So think about that. If we can master sections 1 and 2, we're already over a third of the way to the passing grade. Okay. Now we're going to come down to sections 4 and 5. So here is 24. 20. So together 44, right? So let's say that you get about 40 of those correct, right? And that is, again, if you prepare properly, they're very predictable questions. You just need to know them. And that's what we have the time to do. That's our goal. So if we have those, that'll be 44 plus we are, well, 40 we said, and then say that we got 23 from sections 1 and 2. Do you see how we're already at a 63, right? Before we have even tried to earn a single point from sections 3 and 4. Now, there's like a big asterisk here. If you're building it this way, you need to make sure you are prepared to hit those numbers. The plus side of it is that NASM says like you're prepared to take the test when you start getting around 80%. So our goal is never to just hit 70. If you pass, they don't tell you what your score is, but our goal is to pass with 70 plus as much of a buffer as we can create. So for every person, depending on where you struggle, how much time you have, etc., the size of the buffer is going to vary, but you're going to know, you're going to have an idea. A big part of what we do is learn how to take a test, right? There is a science to this, there are strategies to this, and I think it's tragic that we have a society that weighs heavily like on tests and test scores, but never teaches anybody how to take them. So this is going to be my moment of endorsement that I have had so many people, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that think of themselves as poor test takers. It doesn't matter. You can't be good at anything until you learn the rules of it. So I think try to, as much as you can, disconnect from that, create a clean slate. There is no reason in most cases that you can't become a good test taker, even a great test taker, by the time you get there. So I think almost everyone I work with is pleasantly surprised, if not shocked, by the time they take the test that it's totally different than what they expect. And it's a harder test than they've ever taken before. But the first go, they get in there and it just works because you have a different system and you're coming into it from a point of control. Okay, so now this leaves us with section 3 and section 4. Section 4, the opposite philosophy of section 3. We hopefully aren't going to need a lot of those points, but I want us to get every single one of those points. And here's why. You see this 16%. Amongst the assessment questions, they're not, every single one is not going to be, what is the overactive muscle? What is the underactive muscle, right? There's going to be things about general assessments, just a few. But these questions can also flow into other sections. So like it might say, if your client, what your client demonstrates knees caving in, what is the appropriate stretching exercise? They take that out of section 4. That's going to count under the flexibility chapter of section 5. So there's this tricky way that the biggest thing that people say after they take the test is, I cannot believe how many overactive, underactive muscle questions there are. Now, also know that this is the thing that across the board, everybody feels is the hardest. However, if you can get a handle on this, if you can master this, if you learn the tips and tricks, they are then the easiest questions because there's nothing subjective about them. There's nothing of like, which one is the most right? How do I interpret this? If you know what they're asking, it is like saying, if you mix these two colors, what does it create, right? There's only one answer. So we want to really, really make sure that that's going to be our number one focal area of the whole list. So say that we're somewhere in the 60s, right? And then we get 12 points there, done. We've already passed. So that leaves us with section 3 as kind of, however we want to think about this, bonus or buffer points. Now we're going to get about 15 questions from this section, from all of those chapters together. The hardest material in the book only produce 15-ish questions. So my goal for us is I'll present all the information, but we also have kind of different tracks. Depending what you want to do professionally, you probably don't need to know all of this stuff in and out. But there are a lot of questions that are very common, that are very predictable. So that's the stuff that we are going to focus on, where say that you get into basic science and you get half of them right. Fantastic. In order to get from half all the way up to 100%, the number of hours that takes is, it's really like committing to a whole other course. So anyway, I hope that helps you to feel better, that if you have the right strategy, you're doing it effectively, you really don't need that. So we want to try to rack up as many points as we can there, but in a way that is much more reasonable. All right, so kind of think through your plan, start mapping it out, figuring out where the points are going to come from for you. And then as we get into each section, you're going to have a better idea. You can come back and look at this. You can rewatch this part of the video, but then you can, after we do the lecture, you're going to have a good feel for, okay, how strong of a section can this be for you?
Like and subscribe to receive all of our NASM Personal Trainer Certification review content. If you'd like to learn more about our full NASM CPT prep program with over a 95% pass rate and money-back guarantee, head over to thecptacademy.com.